experimental release of 186,000 Chinook salmon performed downstream from spawning grounds on the Sacramento River.
So we've actually heard a lot. This was an idea that's been in the ether for a long time, right? So these salmon are from Battle Creek, where Coleman National Fish Hatchery is, and they come and they spawn there, and they release them back into Battle Creek. And what a lot of salmon, specifically the Golden State Salmon Association is saying is like, why are we releasing them so high up river, which gives, ton of predators are eating these tiny smolt throughout, and they don't exactly know how many actually get down through all the way to the ocean, but the guess is probably not a ton. And of these, they'll release, millions of salmon every year. It's about 1% returns. So they're trying to up that percentage of how many returns. So this is the first time they actually went all the way down to Butte City and released basically half of their fall Chinook salmon, half in Butte City, half up where they usually release them up on the Sacramento near Battle Creek and Anderson. And this is, obviously we're not going to know for 3 to 5 years what this will do for the salmon populations returning. But in my humble opinion, this is a really good thing.
Yeah, it took me a minute to kind of understand it, but once it clicked, it really clicked. The reason that they're not just releasing all of them where they normally, why wouldn't they just release all of them downstream then? Well, they started to release them upstream when there was heavier flows. Another story that we're talking about water levels being lower and how things are needing to change around the Northern California environment because of them. Having the lower levels of water increases the means of predators to eat these smolt and to not allow these fish to survive, to make it to the ocean, to come back. So putting them more downstream from their natural spawning grounds removes a certain amount of territory these predators have to eat these little baby Chinook salmon. And so it makes total sense, and I can't think of why it wouldn't work. It just eliminates a stretch of water where predators tend to live,
yeah.
And so I can't see it not working at least a little bit. And so I think it's a great story. It just a quote from this: the operation was designed to evaluate if releases in lower levels of the river will help fish bypass predators without increasing straying rates. So they can return back and not stray from the wrong course coming home,
Right. So, I have a few thoughts on this. First and foremost, so salmon know where they're born, right? This is like ingrained in their body. They have this GPS system, which we have no understanding of, basically. We just know that salmon, no matter what, can get to where they spawned. But if they're released in a different place, will that mess with their GPS? That's my first question. A question we might be able to find online.
No, but they're going to be passing through this area to get to their spawning area, if you will. So maybe they just get there and they're like, well, we're good here.
Right. I just wonder if they don't go down the area between Butte City and Battle Creek, if they actually know how to navigate it, right?
That's a good point.
I don't know the answer to that, and maybe that's why this is experimental, to see if they actually can make it all the way back.
Well, but isn't it kind of the idea that this will be kind of their new spawning grounds?
That's another question. But it's not their spawning ground, right? It's not where they spawned. It is downstream from that. But so are they going to just stop in Butte City and be like, we have no idea where to go from here, we'll just spawn here? Maybe.
Of forcing nature, resetting their internal map, maybe. That's what I assume will happen, but I don't know. I'm not a biologist.
Also, I actually had a long conversation with Mike Rasmussen, the fishing guide who we went and caught massive Chinook salmon with, which was an awesome trip that we had. And he had been saying this all along. And I think a lot of, especially, anyone that's fishing for salmon or any fish advocates in Northern California in general are all going to have unique opinions about this subject. And he was saying the same thing. He's like, you're putting these tiny smolts into the river. You wonder why there's massive bass in the Sacramento River, because they are just gobbling up these things as they're coming through, right? And that's why it's, 1% come back. How many percentage are being eaten by the different predators on the way down the Sacramento River? How many are dying in the Pacific Ocean? And then how many are not making it back through these salmon have an arduous journey, But Mike was saying this last year when we went fishing with him. He's like, they are putting them right into this bad area where they're just going to get eaten up.
So and that brings up a different question. Like, if the moving of those salmon downstream, is that going to hurt the bass population? Are you going to start to see smaller bass in that area that are fished?
Yeah, and I don't think that's a huge concern.
No, not to the wildlife, but to the fishermen, I'm sure it will be.
Correct. But I don't think any fisherman could go out and say, hey, let's have less salmon for more bass. Right. There are some people who love bass, but I think everyone is basically trying to help the salmon populations because they are declining at an alarming rate. So unfortunately, we will not get the results of this experimental release for 3 to 5 years. We won't be able to see how many come back, what percentage, if it grows, if it stays the same. But thankfully, we are trying new things because something's got to give. I mean, these numbers are dropping, and we need to do something to try to bring more of these fish back. And we actually, there was another article we did on the website about how they're doing these huge studies on the carcasses of the fish upstream from Battle Creek, because these fish historically have spawned on the McLeod River and the Pitt River, and now they can't get there because of Shasta Dam, right? And so they'll bypass their spawning ground to go to their original spawning ground historically. So salmon are so fascinating in that regard, like that we don't know what makes them tick, and that's why it's so hard to get their populations to grow. And it's fascinating, and I hope we can figure it out. I mean, as in our conversation with Griff coming up, he said, look, we can land on Mars. We got to figure out, we're smart enough to figure out these salmon populations. We just have to work on it and put our minds together. And I think he's absolutely right. Like, and Griff actually says this coming up, not to spoil too much of this interview, but he says, if we can't fix our salmon populations, we suck. Like, we suck as human beings. If we can't figure this out, like, what the heck are we doing?